Manolis, professor at the Barcelona Institute of Global Health, or IS Global. He worked at the International Agency for Research on Cancer in Lyon before moving to Barcelona. He has more than 800 index publications, which is amazing. He served in many committees, including committees by the World Health Organization, and he was the director of the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology. And in terms of research, he has been interested for a long time in understanding how environment and genetics influence or play a role in non-communicable diseases. And more recently, his lab has been more focused on the effects on the disruption of circadian rhythms or circadian disruptions on health, like, for example, exposure to artificial lights and how this could have an impact at night, and how this could have an impact on health, or also the impact of having diet or eating at different times of the day, which is called chrononutrition. Chrononutrition, yeah.
Important.
So I was going to say chronodiet, but no, chrononutrition. And I'm super excited about having him today. Thank you for coming and to hear about the talk that is going to be about why circadian rhythms matter for our health. So thanks a lot.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, thanks a lot for asking me to come. And it's a bit strange that we don't have actually more contacts between IS Global and BSc. So the person that you see there sleeping is the reason why I'm giving this talk. That is Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, late in his life. And the light changed, basically, the fact that we have light changed all our daily rhythms. He was sleeping very few hours because he thought that sleep is a loss of time. But we know from his people working with him that he was taking frequent naps during the day. We had couches in the workplaces, and he was sleeping like what you see here during the day. And we also know that actually sleep is not a loss of time. Apart that it's very pleasant to have a good night's sleep, it is extremely important for repair mechanisms, for setting up the memory, our memories, and many other things. So sleep is central to everything that has to do with circadian disruption. I'm not going to talk about sleep epidemiology, though. I'm going to talk about things that are related to sleep. And there is one of these issues that we don't really know which is the norm, what is the normal sleep time. And one of the ways that people have tried to identify what would be the normal sleep time is to go to, let's see, it is, no, on. So this doesn't move.
This doesn't move.
For whatever reason. Let's see. Okay, well, I'll just click here. Okay, so one of the ways of looking at this is by doing studies in some of the very few populations of hunter-gatherers that exist in this world, like this one that you see. This is the best study, I think, that we have in 3 populations in South Africa and in South America, where these are people living outside. And they went there and they had actigraphs, sensors. And what you see here is blue is the sleep time, yellow is light, and black and red is physical activity. And if you just concentrate on the top one, you will see that there is light, then comes the evening, the night, and the people don't go to sleep, they just stay there. They have some fire and they talk to each other, and then they go to sleep. And then just before sunrise, when the temperature changes, they wake up again. The change in the temperature is not relevant for us because we are living inside, they are living outside, but all the rest is relevant for us. And what these studies show is that basically the time they are sleeping is not very far away from what we are sleeping. The average time is something between 5.7 to 7 hours for adults, which is very similar. So if we take this as correct, this would be how we evolved as humans. with this type of duration of sleep. The other way that we define norm in sleep is by looking at health rates. So there are lots of studies like this one. This is all-cause mortality, and you can see the classical U shape. And although most of the recommendations say that we should be sleeping as adults, this changes when you're an adolescent or when you're a child. They say you should be sleeping from 7 to 8 hours. Actually, if you look at the graph, it's between 6 and 7 hours if you want to minimize mortality. So this is what we know more or less about sleep, and it will come in my talk more times. So what are the issues we're going to talk about? 24/7 society, working at night in many sectors, light at night. This has changed enormously during the last 100 years. We have light outside and we have light inside, obviously. And for people who have kids will understand this picture here. And we have different spectra of light also, and I'll talk about it later. Food. We are eating hours that evolutionarily we were not eating. Normally we were eating during the day. Now we're not. We're eating. We're eating a lot. We're eating differently, but now I'm talking only about the time. We are eating at hours that we were not used to be eating. As we evolved as humans. Sleep. We're waking up with an alarm clock in big chunks of our life, rather than waking up normally, which is not good. Physical activity, which is also related to circadian rhythms, but I'm not going to talk about it. We have much less evidence about how this the timing of physical activity may affect health, and obviously jet lag, and I'm not going to talk either about jet lag. And I'm going to talk about quite a few things, so I will be very quick through some of the issues. So let's talk a bit about circadian rhythms. This is about misalignment. This is what we're talking about. Normally, you should be living according to the sun. So the external time should be really aligned with your internal time. But in many occasions, it is not. You work shift work and you work during the night while you should be sleeping, or you travel to the United States, or you party and all the time. So you have social jet lag, or you have different times in the work days as in the weekdays. And all of these things seem to be important. And circadian rhythm is circadian. It is nearly 24 hours, not exactly 24 hours. And they have a more or less 24-hour period. If we close the lights, we put curtains here and we stayed here for 2 days, we will still have circadian changes in many aspects, in the way our body would function. So they persist and they adjust. You go to the United States and you adjust eventually. And they affect lots of different functions in our body. Autonomic, so the temperature, hormone excretion, melatonin is the obvious, but there are many others, as you will see, and a big chunk of our genes. So they're not clock genes. We have the clock genes, but there are many, many other genes that depend on the clock genes. So you see it this way, and you can understand that you can have circadian misalignment can affect many different biological pathways. And that is why we're talking about cancer, about fatigue, about cardiovascular, about obesity, about mental health, and it's plausible. The molecular mechanisms the genetic mechanisms are very well described. I mean, there were all 3 Nobel Prizes on this. And there are a number of feedback loops, and I'm not going to go into that because I don't have time to talk about, and I'm not going to talk about gene-environment interactions. And we have this organization with the central clock in the base of our brain, the suprachiasmatic nodule, and then nucleus, and then this depends on the light. It's controlled by light. And then what we have is we have all sorts of clocks all over our body, basically. They connect with the central clock, and also they have different cues that affect them. So nutrition is very important. So you go to the United States, your central clock adapts quicker because of light. Your clocks in your intestine don't adapt so quick, and you have, some of this gastrointestinal things that we have when we have jet lag is also because of circadian misalignment. It's not that you eat only differently. And this affects many things. And this has been a really nice study, very early study in a way, of in mice, where they gave to two groups of mice, identical mice, supercaloric diet. And in one group, they gave it during the day, and in another group, they gave it during the night. The day is the top one, and the night is the dark one. And you can see that there is a difference in how, in terms of body weight. And obesity is one of the outcomes we're interested. Now, it seems to be going the other way around than what you would expect, except that mice are nocturnal animals. So it goes the right way around, in fact, as we would have expected. And for us, it would be the opposite exactly. And many years later, I'm not going to go into that. There has been a pretty nice molecular genetic explanation of that. The slides, whoever wants, we can send them to whoever wants them. So the other issue that I'm not going to talk, but it is important, is individual variability. We know by our own experience whether you are morning type or evening type or normal type. Some people function in the morning, and whoever has a group and has people in their group, that some people, you do a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning and, they just don't function. So, and we know that. And the issue is not how this affects only immediate effects, fatigue and sleepiness, but whether this is associated also with longer-term effects. What happens with a morning type if they work night shifts? Is it worse as compared to an evening type? Big issue, not well, in fact, developed. So let's start with night shift work. It is common, just look at the statistics. 15% are doing night shift work. They may not be doing every night. It is less this percentage, but doing night work sometimes during the work time. So exposure is common. And we have some areas that it is more common. Transportation, health sector, obviously, restaurants, entertainment. That is Boada in the Ramblas, which is a very big bar, by the way. And when the Generalitat did an estimation of how many people are exposed to night shift work, it was in Catalonia, they have a matrix. They calculated about 136,000 workers work at night. It is not identified a recognized carcinogen. It is a probable carcinogen. I'll come back to that. But if it was, it would be the most important occupational carcinogen in women, basically, for breast cancer. So it's a common thing. The IARC, where I was working a long time ago, did an evaluation of, does the evaluation of carcinogen, the official evaluation of WHO. And they evaluated night shift work as a probable human carcinogen, which is the second strongest. It's not group 1, it's group 2A. And this was done by having very, very strong data in animals. They put light to rats, mice, and they developed cancer eventually. They changed the rhythms. And they evaluated at that time in 2007, and that was a surprise, for many people seeing this evaluation, that in humans, the evidence was limited. These are standard words that they are used by WHO. Limited means not sufficient. So you have doubts. There could be biases, confounding, or chance that could affect. So it was classified as 2A. And my group, following this, we were starting a very big study in Spain with about 10,000 subjects. So we incorporated a lot of things in the study on circadian disruption, not only night shift. And then that was at that time done by Kurt Streif, who Martin knows because we are trying to set up a joint project. Kurt is now in my group here. And then 12 years later, they did a new evaluation, and by that time, now I'm in the group of experts in that time because we have done studies. So I was chairing the epidemiological group here. And it was sort of disappointing that after 12 years of research, intensive research, we ended up with the same classification, 2A. Not group 1, not group 3 either. So, and it's a very uncomfortable. You don't know what to do. Do you have to take the lead? What do you do with a nurse who has worked 20 years as a nurse at night and develops breast cancer? You don't know, is this occupational or not? So with the classification of 2A, you don't really know. And it was very, very uncomfortable. But, that was the evidence we had. And what was even more disappointing is that IARC is using a sort of triangulation to evaluate whether something is a carcinogen. So you have animal data, you have human data, and you have experimental data. And you can have limited human data. If you have very strong animal data and very strong experimental data in exposed humans, then it can be classified as a definitive human carcinogen. And the disappointment was that we didn't even have strong evidence of mechanistic studies in humans. We had a lot of experimental data, but you really need to have strong data in exposed humans. And that was not very good, the studies we had. So, and that's what motivated also my group, and now the big study we did after that, which is a big European study, is very much focused on molecular epidemiology, exposome type research, where we go for about exposures, mechanism, and disease. So very much focused on biological pathways, and I'll show some of the findings. Let me show you some of the findings we had at the group and why we said it was limited. It is not that we didn't have positive findings, we had positive findings. So breast cancer, this is the strongest analysis with about 12,000 people, 6,000 breast cancer cases. And with Gemma Castaño, we did the big Spanish group, the MCC, she was the co-PI. And this is the relative risk. So 112, so 12% increased risk for, if you have ever worked as a night worker, we find this 5-country study, you have 12% higher risk of getting breast cancer. 12%, and it's significant, whatever you want, is not very much. It is not little either, because breast cancer is the most common cancer in women, and this exposure is very common. So even 12% multiplied by number of women exposed for, these are lots of breast cancer cases. Still, you look for internal consistency, and we didn't have it. We had clearly an increase related to intensity, so more than 3 nights per week. This is very important. It is dose response. It is you do a lot of night shifts, you have more risk. But then we looked at premenopausal, postmenopausal, and then things started not being as clear. And we can get biological explanations or other type of explanations for that. But we didn't have good priors to say that we should not be finding it in postmenopausal women. And we found it only in premenopausal women. And we have other things that occur only in premenopausal women or only in postmenopausal women, but we didn't have a good explanation here, which makes us very, very careful in saying, this is a clear increase. And if you want, we can talk which is the explanation, but it will take some time. Prostate cancer. This is, I'm not saying this is the best study because it's my study, but it is the best study in prostate cancer. So, and that was Kyriaki Papandouni, who was a doctoral student then. Now she's associate professor in Vienna. And again, every night shift, more or less 10-15% increased risk, not very high. Prostate cancer, the most common cancer in men with lung cancer, and common exposure also. 15% increased risk for a cancer that we have no idea what causes it, apart from genetics that we know. And some either minor, we don't know what causes this very, very common cancer. So if this is true, that's important. And then you look at dose response at quartiles of exposure, and you clearly find a dose response. As you can see, it is, it goes up to 40% for people who have worked a lot or who have done a very intensive night shift. So it is there, but still, you have some doubts. It's not very high the risk. And this is what we find systematically. We have very clear positive signals for cancer and for colorectal cancer also. And we are not 100% sure for the reasons that I've showed and for various other reasons. So that's why we said it's limited. And this will not change, this type of evaluation. It will continue being limited unless we get massive epi studies that, we have already a lot. And that's what we're getting. For cardiovascular or cardiometabolic, the evidence is much stronger, which is not so surprising, actually, if you think about misalignment. And I'm not going into details. These are, again, not super high risk or meta-analysis. There are lots of these as we know, meta-analysis pop up, everywhere. So this is one of the good ones, about 15% increased risk for total CVD incidence, and they're very clear, as you can see on the right-hand side, dose response, very, very clear dose response. And this has been replicated. Again, not super high, but, pretty consistent. You look at things like obesity and overweight, again, something like a 20% increased risk. You do diabetes, you find the same. You do metabolic syndrome, you find the same. So and then you say, okay, these are not the highest risks we have in the world, 10 to 20%. And given that they're epidemiological studies, you have always population studies, you have always biases and whatever. The main, I think, explanation of why we're not getting higher risk is that, first of all, that they are not so much higher for people who have worked ever. They can become higher for people who have worked a lot. But also, think of something that increases your risk by 10, 20%. You have exposure misclassification. If you have exposure misclassification, and you have quite a lot in many of these studies, you have a bias. And in principle, this bias would lower your risk towards the null. So it is not at all surprising that some studies would, from 1.2, they go down to 1.1 or to 1.05. And some other studies go higher. It is normal that you have a variation. And if you're at that limit, it is normal that it can be close to 1. But overall, the evidence says, hey, we have a problem with major diseases, cardiometabolic, cancer, and many others. So this is a real issue. And there are other things that I'm going to go about. So given all that, we decided that we would go more into, we were doing anyway, molecular epi studies in my group, and we went more strongly about this type of trying to find mechanisms. And this is a study in 4 countries, very intensive study with day and night workers in Spain, Holland, Denmark, and Sweden, with about 900 participants. We ended up doing it in the health system because it's easier to do complex studies like that, where you get feces and you get blood and you get repeated blood and you get repeated saliva and all that stuff among healthcare personnel, because it's easier. We tried to do it in Transport Metropolitano de Barcelona, and it was a bit more complex. And we are looking at biological pathways. We are looking at some outcomes like mental, cardiometabolic, aging, sleep, and the whole combination, the connection, exposures, mechanisms, and some outcomes. But it's very much on the biological pathways, this study. And if you look at what we are doing, it is quite complex. We have people who for 5 days are collecting, wear a sensor, they are completing questionnaires, electronic questionnaires. They have a basic questionnaire. They are doing a mental, a cognitive evaluation twice. They're getting saliva they're getting blood. We're getting saliva for all the 24 hours to do hormones. And in the Spanish component, we are getting also feces for the microbiome analysis. And then we have repeated the study 2 years later also. What I'm showing is the first part, the first contact. So these are pretty complex studies. And what we're getting, just to give an idea of how things work in circadian disruption, this is the melatonin. This is from a previous study we did in SEA, actually, in Martorell. And you can see we had melatonin in urine, all the urine samples of 24 hours, and then we reconstruct their curve. And you can see it goes up and down. For some people, more than in others. And we do that, and we do this type of analysis for several of the hormones we're analyzing. And we have done this with Barbara Harding, who's a postdoc from the States working with me. And you develop this is for melatonin, but we have it for other hormones, this type of curve. These are the same workers actually in SEAT, working 3 weeks night, 3 weeks evening, 3 weeks day. So you have here the 3 weeks day and the 3 weeks night. And you can see how the peak of melatonin changes many hours. And had I put testosterone, you would have the same thing. And had I put cortisol, you would have, again, similar things or other hormones. The peak changes. The yellow line is the day. So the night they peak. For us, melatonin peaks early morning, 4 or 5 o'clock, 4 or 5 in the morning. For the night workers, it peaks after midday. And it's not only that, but the total, if you look at the area under the curve, the total concentration actually changes also. So you have it, the peak at the wrong time in quotes. For the night worker, it's the right time, but it is not how it should be normally, and you have less of it. And in what we are finding, and I'm going very quickly from this new study, the E4 night study, and I'm going quickly because we haven't yet analyzed some of the data, in fact. So we are still analyzing, but we have several findings. And what we find is very consistent changes in all sorts of biological pathways. Very, very consistent. And I'm just going to go quickly, and if you want, we can discuss. So mental health, clear increase in depressive type of symptoms and in stress, not in anxiety. Very, very clear. Cognition, again, very clear effects on cognition, probably related to the frontal lobe on memory and attention. And this is also extremely important. And we have some other cognition tests, which is called this is cold cognition, the hot cognition, which is even more relevant for how, for example, people in the healthcare system or people doing sensitive jobs would respond, because you lose capacity for response capacity, which is obviously for some type of jobs extremely important. So clear findings. Hormones. We have done a series of hormones in saliva, apart from melatonin, androgens, a number of corticosteroids, and we have for all of them change in the peak and also change in the quantity. So it is not only melatonin, it is a series of sex steroid type hormones, which is interesting because the two main cancers that we get is breast and prostate. So this could be one of the biological pathways. Cardiometabolic, we are getting pretty clear signals again of BMI, obesity, and also in the metabolomics analysis and blood pressure, actually, we're getting, and the metabolomic analysis, we're getting pretty clear signals of changes in the lipidic profile. We have used the Nightingale platform for metabolomics, which is heavy on lipids. And we are getting clearly in the night shift workers, lower polyunsaturated and higher monounsaturated fats, actually, which is compatible with an increase of cardiometabolic type outcomes. We have done a panel of an immune panel, which is a Luminex that we did with Carlos Albino's lab on a series of cytokines, chemokines, and growth factors. And with immunology, it is very, very difficult to interpret unless you are a very good immunologist. And they are very good immunologists in Carlota's group, and we are talking a lot. And they say that what we find is pretty reasonable. We don't have big findings, actually. We have clear changes in some of the cytokines overexpression or suppression, and I put a few of them, EGF, IL-7, we have overexpression, and IL-18, TNF-alpha, we have suppression, and then you do also PCAs and whatever. You don't identify very clear patterns that this is the pattern of the night shift, this is the pattern of the day shift. We do find, statistically significant findings after correction and everything, but it's not so clear. There may be a hint of, pro-inflammatory cytokines being higher in the night shift workers, and we're still working with them. But immunology is complex. We have done different types of omics. We have done epigenomics, and we've done proteomics with one of the high throughput, high sensitive LCMS protein platforms. And we're looking at different outcomes. And we are finding in all of them results that, most of them are statistically significant even after corrections and everything. There's nothing really super spectacular, but you have, positive findings and statistically significant in everything. You don't have this super positive finding in any of these. And, we have, for telomeres, we have an increase telomere length for those working more years. When we're doing the epigenetics and we look at aging, we have statistical significance, in one of the scores we have used the Grimmage for accelerated aging, which is very important. And obviously, you have very strong findings for things like sleep. Well, and the hormones are very, very clear and very strong. But for many of the omics and for also the proteomics, we cannot identify, we cannot differentiate very well between night and day, which is sort of surprising to me because this is a really big change that you do. And many of them are not permanent workers. Nearly everything we do, we have stronger findings for the permanent night workers, those who work many nights. And if you dose response, we do find things, not always significant, but clearly the signals are for the people who are working very intensively rather than those who do just one night. So overall, we have findings in everything we've looked nearly. Some of them very strong, many of the omics parts not so strong. Let me go and cover very quickly two other aspects that affect the general population. So this is an extreme situation. You change the night for the day. This is extreme. But we have less extreme exposures, but that affect the whole population. One of them is light at night. There have been some small, admittedly, but very interesting studies on what happens when you get blue light. Blue light is the blue spectrum, is the white LEDs, the very bright LEDs. This is the blue spectrum light. The blue spectrum light is the one that suppresses more melatonin. And this is what we have in the streets. They put white because you want to have bright light. And what we have in many of our hospitals also, they haven't changed. And this is a very nice study that they compared people using light emitting e-readers, Kindle, light emitting, or they just read a book. And it is quite a long exposure. So they would be doing this for 3-4 hours. You think it's a long exposure if you look at how many hours people look at screens during the evening before they go. That is more or less what they do. Not necessarily a tablet, but TV, tablet, and cell phone. So it is not extreme. And they find effects in the peak and in the amount of melatonin. And they also find effects for those who have the e-reader, the light-emitting e-reader, on sleep quality. So we have a few of these studies, very well done, small. These are 12 subjects or something like that. But we have quite a few of them, but we really need some bigger studies, really, to say, to quantify. There should be no doubt that it affects sleep. But to quantify and get some better estimates, I think we would really need some more studies. We were talking before in the group, we were talking with Martin and Eulalia about sleep. And how does this affect health? How does this affect other aspects of our life that are important? This is a super interesting study done in Seattle, where they have, as we have here, a problem with sleep of adolescents. They don't sleep enough. And what they did in Seattle, they changed the hour where the adolescents would start school. They took it 1 hour later. And then the counter argument is, okay, they start 1 hour later, they go to sleep 1 hour later. And these guys there had the possibility of, before they did the change, to give sensors to a group of school children, and then they measured when did they sleep before they did the change and when did they sleep after they did the change. And what they found is what you see here. It is 2006 is before the change, 2007 is after the change, and you can see the activity, when do they wake up, and you can see in the down part the duration. And clearly the blue is after the change, and clearly the adolescents gained hours of sleep, not 1 full hour, but they gained about 3/4. So they could show, having a very nice study with sensors, that being more flexible with some of the time schedules, you can gain a lot. And this is a central message, not only for adolescents, a central message for all of us, actually, which means flexibility of our time schedules. We have been working a lot. This is Ariadna Garcia, who was a postdoc working with me on this, on environmental light. This is a photo of Barcelona taken from the International Space Stations. The astronauts there, they take photos of all the big cities, and they're put in the database and they're pre-accessed. I mean, you ask them and you get them. And these are digital photos, which means that as when you take with a digital camera and they give you an analysis of the spectra, if you look at it. So that's what we can do here. So we can zoom in, because they are very high quality photos, and have a grid that's about from 10 to 30 meters, and identifying how much light you have in front of your house, with an error of about 10 to 30 meters. And not only this, but we can have intensity and we can have spectrum, which is what we did here. And we were interested in the blue light spectrum. And we did this for our big cancer study, and we analyzed breast and prostate cancer in Barcelona and Madrid, because we had good photos only for Barcelona and Madrid. And we had these very surprising findings that, we published well, it got a lot of media attention. And we were extremely cautious in our interpretation, because we find, you can see in the graph, a very clear association of increased risk for breast and prostate cancer in relation to blue light exposure. And the relative risks are pretty high. Prostate cancer, relative risk of 2, so 100% increased risk. And we were extremely cautious in our interpretation, because the obvious explanation is you have a bias, you have a socioeconomic bias. And we could not identify any bias in our study. And we have actually quite a few studies done with not great exposure assessment, though, that show more or less consistent findings for breast cancer. I think this is, again, the best study we have, because we have much better exposure assessment than others. So it is up, and this is what you have in front of your house. What we would like to do is to get in the houses and get long-term sensors, and what we would have for cancer to go back in the past, because we're talking about long-term exposures. And this is what we are working now. And obviously, in terms of prevention, what does it tell us? Not only for cancer, but also for sleep quality. Our hospital should move from this model with bright lights that you really don't need in the night to have these bright lights in the corridor, to this type of model of much less bright, with different type of LEDs, the soft LEDs that really are also is light, and they suppress melatonin, but they don't suppress as much as this very bright light. So there are a number of things you can do in terms of prevent. Okay, so I'll go extremely quick through a huge topic, because I should stop, which is diet, which is one of the issues we have been working. Ana Paloma was a fantastic PhD student and then postdoc. And what we have been doing in epidemiology with diet and nutrition, is they're talking about what you eat, Mediterranean diet, whatever, junk food or whatever, and how much you eat, obesity. And we traditionally have never asked in our big studies, big cohort studies, when do you eat? Which, from what we know from animal studies, is important. And so that's what we did, and other people are doing. And a lot of this discussion also goes with fasting. how many hours you should stay without eating and when. And one of our first analyses was this one that you see here for breast and prostate cancer. And this is time between dinner and sleep. The idea being, the hypothesis that we're testing is that we have evolved eating during the day and then staying at some time and then going to sleep. This is how humans have evolved. And now we don't do that. You have a big supper and then you go to sleep. So in this study, which is it's pretty big, this has several thousands of people. We looked at timing between your last big meal and the time of sleep. And the longer the time you can see the curve, the lower your risk. Now, this is obviously related to what time are you having your last big meal. If you have it late or you have it early. If you have it early, you have more time before you go to sleep. And if you have it like the Scandinavians, you have it many hours before. What happens though with the Scandinavians is because they are eating very early, then they have a restaurant. After sometimes they have something to eat, a yogurt or something else, which means that you reactivate the liver and the whole system. So they may be missing the advantages of non-eating. So we find very clear results, and another very big French study found exactly the same. And I'm going to go through that. And what we have been working with Ana Palomar was the issue of fasting, because there's a lot of literature on that without very strong data. It is pretty obvious from experimental data that, if you fast, you have many, advantages in terms of metabolic health, and there are many pathways. But then you have randomized trials like this one that was published at the New England, where they looked at people who were eating only during a specific time period or any time. And they looked at obesity and they couldn't find any difference. You look at the curve, there's no difference really. So you control the time you eat. Yeah, you eat less calories in a way. But for the same amount of calories, in this study, it didn't make a difference whether you were not eating some times of day. And at least our theory and other people's theory is that timing of the fasting is important. And we are working with a hypothesis that timing of fasting is important through an evolutionary base when people were not eating, which is the night. And many of our studies actually are looking at this, and we have this type of fund. We analyze a very big cohort from France, which is about 100,000 people. And we have an effect for time-restricted eating, for example. This is for diabetes, but we have done it also for prostate cancer and for others. We have an effect for people who have time-restricted eating more than 13 hours. But this happens for people who really fast during the night, not people who fast during the day. So for people who have a breakfast before 8 a.m., which means that they fasted 13 hours during the time that they should not be eating, that's when we find that there's effect. But this is open for discussion. So I'm gonna close. Chrononutrition is important. We still have a long way to go, and many of these, we need many more, I think, epi studies, and we need many more mechanistic studies actually to see what happens with different time-restricted eating patterns. So why it matters for health? Because it regulates lots of physiological systems. And disrupting this alignment of times through light and night, or this super disruption from night shift or different day schedules, may have different health effects. We have had, although I started saying it was disappointing that at IARC, after 12 years of intense research, we ended up with the same classification as 12 years before. We have significant progress. We know much more about it. We have in many areas very slow progress because people do what the other people did. As we do often in research, we just repeat. And it's sometimes difficult to break what has been done and say, this hasn't worked. We have to do something different. And this is clear for the light at night research because the group in Harvard did something, people do what the group in Harvard did. And that was wrong. It's not okay. I mean, the group in Harvard is fantastic, but they did it a long time ago. So, and it works like that a bit. And we really have to think a bit wider and use new methods also, new tools that we have. And also, there's a big issue with regulation. We know a lot, and in the work conditions, in some countries, they regulate better. They allow night workers to take a nap, for example, in the middle of the night. In most countries, we don't regulate at all. And we are there talking also with the Generalitat to see how we can develop some guidelines here. These are some of the members of the group. Barbara, we coordinated the European project. The molecular Kurt was responsible of IARC for that and now works in our group and is super important. And he has a very good knowledge. With Gemma, we did the big case control study in Spain, breast, prostate, colorectal, and others. Anna is a super biostatistician who's key in all of this analysis. Kyriaki was very important in developing the night shift work. Now she's in Vienna. Anna and Camille, who's a nutritionist, she's assistant professor for the chrononutrition. That's all. Thank you.
An amazing talk. Questions for Manolis? Yeah.
Thanks for all this presentation. Really nice and very insightful. You were listing all these problems correlated with these night shifts it can have. So just for large numbers of years. And I'm wondering if there's any evidence or any study on how quickly the body is able to fight back. Let's say that you stop working a night shift after 20 years of doing it. And is the body able to recover from that?
Yeah. Very good question. Actually, I have a slide, but I didn't. I bypassed it. You know, for many of the carcinogens, we know that, or not only carcinogens, risk factors. You stop the exposure, and your risk may go down quicker or not as quick. For smoking, for example, we know that for cardiovascular disease, when you stop smoking, risk goes down pretty quick. For cancer, it goes down very slow, but it goes down. So what happens here? What we have seen from the analysis of breast and prostate cancer is that you stop working at night and your risk goes down pretty quick, you know, a few years. If this is true, you know, I'm talking to a scientific audience. That's why I'm expressing all the doubts and everything. You know, I would not give the same talk if I was talking to the Generalitat, okay? But, you know, it is okay here because, you know, we work with doubts and with errors and with everything. That's why I'm expressing all the doubts. So if this is true, the best evidence we have is that it's true. If this is true, that would also explain why some of the big cohort studies didn't find much because they came late. Basically, they have, and it may explain why in breast cancer we have stronger findings for premenopausal as compared to postmenopausal women because most of the shift work is done in younger ages. So you stop and then your risk goes down, which is a good, actually, also aspect if it is like that.
Make it that far.
Yeah.
Hi, very nice talk, and I'm very interested because of myself. I think that's pretty safe night old. Your statistics, or at least the ones that you commented, are based on people who are doing night shifts versus the ones who are doing day shifts. So this is maybe not a choice, right? You have to work. It's the work you have, and you have to work everything. Have you made or have you heard of some study where, for example, in student populations, where some students naturally prefer to study at night versus those that prefer to study in the morning, early in the morning? I mean, are there differences? Because you mentioned the first part of the talk that there's there can be a misalignment between the circadian and external time. So how frequent is that misalignment? Can it be measured? And if yes, do you see that natural night owls may not have these risks?
Yeah. The time schedule that workers don't like at all is evening shift because it separates them from the family, from the social program. So they prefer morning or night, and they prefer night because they get also paid better. And in some cases, it is not their choice. In SEAT, in Martorell, they have about 14,000 people working there in the zone of Franco, most of them are in Martorell. 9,000 are doing shift work, and they have no choice. You know, it is like that. It's 3 weeks night, 3 weeks evening, 3 weeks morning. Your morning type, your evening type, that's what you have to do. And if you don't like it, change job. So in most occasions, you have no choice. In many situations, you know, in the health system, yeah, there are many, we have no choice when we are, you know, you have to do some night duties as a doctor or as a nurse. But then some people, some nurses choose to do night work because it fits better with their family planning, family situation, or for whatever reason. And some people cannot take it, you know, because they are morning types. The morning types don't take it, not because of their future breast cancer risk, but because they don't sleep well. They have, so night type people, actually, it's easier for them to do night work. We find that the long-term effects, but these are stratified analysis. You know, we do interaction between night chronotype and whatever outcome you have. So in all interactions, as we know from statistics, they need huge samples. So we don't find a difference actually. You know, different studies found different things, which means that there is not a very strong, I think, pattern for long-term effects. For short-term effects, there's a clear pattern. You know, morning types, they adapt worse to night shift work. They are more sleepy. They get more tired. That's very important. You know, it's not cancer, but it's extremely important to be tired every day and to be sleepy every day. And you get mental health problems and et cetera, out of this. So, you know, I don't know what you do in your personal life, but I mean, it's your own choice basically, because you're a night type.
The question is if night owls have higher risks, or is it
Long term,
if you are
not
night
clear.
owl, you should try to sleep like normal people to prevent certain
Just
risks?
don't go to morning meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning. Tell them that you're not functioning.
Yeah.
Then, okay. Yeah, go.
So thank you for the talk. I really like it a lot. I'm asking myself whether have you considered the parenthood effect, you know, this monitoring of the people, especially for mothers. Because nowadays we're seeing an interesting pattern of woman who says to be mother, who doesn't, and for certain years.
There have been some analysis, if you're referring to effects in the children of pregnant mother, for example, there have been some studies looking at exposures of the mothers during pregnancy, including chemicals and including sleep, for example. And there are a number of studies that find that sleep and disrupted sleep is associated both with some issues of the mother, but also with reproductive outcomes of the child, birth weight and preterm births, in fact. We have quite a few. Now, I haven't followed that literature, so I couldn't tell you, you know, if there's any recent meta-analysis putting everything together.
It's just
Yeah.
curiosity, no?
Yeah. But it is normal that, you know, the environment, the milieu of the pregnant mother would affect the fetus also, obviously.
Okay, so we do two last questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have a question regarding the proposal of changing hospital lights, because I understand it's better for the patients and the workers, like by themselves. But if you're putting the lights down, is it not going to make the workers more sleepy? And with doctors and nurses at night, maybe not be the best.
You don't put the lights down in the operating room,
Yeah.
obviously, but you just, we have become more sensitive in saying that, you know, there's an issue with light pollution. It is, sorry, I'm escaping from the hospital, so I'll come back to the hospital. It's a very big issue at the ecological level, you know, within the wild, how it affects the, you know, the environment. And we are coming more into terms that, you really don't need super bright lights to do most of the things during the night. You don't need it, and this has as an effect, of suppressing melatonin and whatever else, and you really don't need it. And which means that, with the tablets and with all that stuff, you have exposure to blue light mostly, although there are filters, and this affects your hormonal system. So why should you have it? Take some precautions, and you become more sleepy because there's a red light in the corridor. I don't know. I don't.
It's just that I guess for working and being active at night, it's better to have
You
your
have to be
cycle.
active, for sure. You have to be active, and you don't want and this is an issue also for the industries. You really need light, because otherwise you have accidents. If you don't have enough light, you have accidents. So you cannot lower the light up to some extent. But we have measured light in many of our studies, and it clearly relates with degree of changes in melatonin. Clearly, more light, more lower levels of melatonin. So it does affect your sleep.
Thank you.
One last question.
During the talk, you spoke about that shifting your circadian rhythm has an effect in the possibility of developing prostate cancer in this case, also increasing the odds ratio, both sleeping and also depending on your chronometabolism of how much time do you do fasting. You focused on night shift, but do you know of anything related with job population? Like, for example, you spoke about social jet lag that affects into your circadian rhythm, but here, especially in Spain, with a young population that nearly every weekend goes partying, spends long times in pubs, discos, with blue light. Also, lots of them eat or junk food just before going home. So having a really heavy meal before going to sleep, late sleeping. Do you know of anything related to any study of these cases?
Yeah. Well, having a party will basically make you have a hangover perhaps next day and being sleepy. Apart from that, nothing else. Having repeated parties, what you are referring to, changing very much your daytime schedule to a nighttime schedule. If this is prolonged, it has to be prolonged. Nothing happens long term unless it's prolonged. Everything I've described happens for people who have worked for years, have their cycle disrupted. The short term, what you have is fatigue and sleepiness. That's what you have. And if you having the social jet lag all your life, you will have the same effects as night shift workers, for sure. And what we're really interested is of this not so extreme changes as night shift workers, the less extreme changes because they affect the whole population. And we do find, pretty clear signals for that also. Which, much lower risk, obviously. You wouldn't expect that you would have the same effects as night shift workers, but this is why we're looking at environmental light, our chrononutrition, all that stuff. So you do have effects, but don't expect chronic effects because you party, during the time you were studying. Forget it. Okay, you can party freely.
I think we can end here.
Okay.
You can party freely.
Okay.
No, thank you. Have a